My wife's father called me worthless trash, in front of the entire family. She deserves better, he declared. I nodded politely and said, "You're right, sir," and left his house alone. The next day, at 10 a.m., he got 3 text messages, one from his lawyer, "The deal is over," one from his daughter, "I hate you," and one from me, "Don't mess with trash. You're worthless trash, Samuel." My daughter deserves better. My name is Samuel Hayes and I'm 37 years old. I've spent the last 12 years building a private equity firm in Denver, Colorado, making investments that most people never see coming. I work through shell companies, anonymous trusts, holding firms that keep my name buried in paperwork so deep that even the smartest lawyers take months to trace it back to me. That's how I like it, clean, invisible, powerful. But right now, standing in my father-in-law's kitchen, watching him wave his coffee mug around, like he's conducting an orchestra of insults, I felt anything but powerful. Robert Kellerman had been calling me worthless for 3 years straight. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time I walked through his front door. She could have married Dr. Patterson's son, he continued, gesturing toward my wife, Elena. But no, she picked you, a man who won't even tell us what he really does for a living. Elena sat at the breakfast table, stirring her eggs around her plate. She never looked up, never said a word, just kept stirring those damn eggs like they held the answer to everything wrong with our marriage. "Samuel works in finance, Dad," she finally mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. "Finance," Robert scoffed. "You know what that means?" "Nothing. Could be selling insurance for all we know. Could be managing other people's retirement accounts at some strip mall office." I watched him pace around his granite kitchen island, his face getting redder with each lap. This was Robert Kellerman, founder and chief executive officer of Nexora Labs, a struggling biotech company that hadn't turned a real profit in 4 years. He had inherited money from his father's construction business, and thought that made him some kind of financial genius. What Robert didn't know was that I'd been tracking his company's financial statements for 8 months. Nexora Labs was hemorrhaging cash, burning through what little venture funding they had left. They needed a miracle. They needed exactly the kind of anonymous investor that I specialized in being. "You sit there like a mute," Robert said, pointing his finger at my chest. "Real men speak up, real men defend themselves." I nodded slowly. "You're right, Mr. Kellerman." The kitchen went quiet. Elena finally looked up from her plate, confusion written across her face. Even Robert seemed surprised by my response. "I am right," he said, his voice uncertain now. "Absolutely," I said, standing up and reaching for my jacket. "Elena does deserve better." I walked toward the front door, feeling their eyes on my back. As I reached for the handle, I heard Elena's chair scrape against the floor. "Samuel, wait." But I was already outside, breathing the cold November air, knowing that everything was about to change. I met Elena 5 years ago at a conference in Boulder. She was presenting research on gene therapy applications, brilliant, and passionate about her work at a small biotech firm. I was there, because I'd been considering investments in the medical technology sector. What I didn't expect was to fall for the presenter. Our relationship moved fast. Too fast probably. Within 18 months, we were married in a small ceremony that her father complained about for weeks. He wanted something bigger, more expensive, something that would impress his country club friends. But Elena and I preferred simple things. Or so I thought. The problem started during our first Christmas as a married couple. Robert had too much wine and began interrogating me about my work. I gave him the same vague answers I gave everyone. Private investments, portfolio management, consulting for high net worth individuals. All technically true, but missing the crucial detail that I was the high net worth individual. My company, Amberlin Ventures, managed over $200 million in assets. We specialized in early-stage investments in technology and medical companies, the kind of deals that required discretion and anonymity. I built my reputation by staying invisible, letting other people take credit, while I quietly collected returns that most investors could only dream about. But Robert interpreted my discretion as weakness. He started making comments about my mystery job, and how a real man would be more transparent about his career. Elena would change the subject, or laugh it off, but she never told him to stop, never stood up for me. The verbal attacks escalated over the following months. Robert would make snide remarks about my clothes, my car, my lack of ambition. He'd compare me to other men in their social circle, successful doctors and lawyers, who drove expensive cars, and talked loudly about their achievements. What made it worse was watching Elena shrink during these confrontations. The confident scientist I'd married became quiet and apologetic, constantly making excuses for her father's behavior. She'd pull me aside, after particularly brutal dinners and whisper apologies, promising it would get better. But she never confronted him directly. 3 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything. While researching potential investments, I came across Nexora Labs' funding documents. The company was in serious trouble, burning through cash faster than they could raise it. They'd approached dozens of venture capital firms, but their debt-to-revenue ratio scared away most serious investors. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could help save Robert's company through an anonymous investment, or I could let it fail. The businessman in me saw the potential upside. The son-in-law in me saw something else entirely. I started the due diligence process, keeping my identity buried behind layers of corporate structure. Robert would never know that his salvation was sitting at his dinner table, listening to his insults, watching his daughter stay silent. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago during Elena's birthday dinner. We were at Robert's house, and he'd invited his brother-in-law, Harold, a cardiac surgeon who loved talking about his vacation home in Aspen. Harold just bought a new boat, Robert announced as Elena cut her cake. 40-foot yacht cost him more than most people make in 5 years. Harold laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. "What about you, Samuel? Any big purchases lately? New car, investment property?" I should have seen it coming. Robert's eyes lit up with that familiar gleam that meant he was about to go in for the kill. "Samuel doesn't make those kinds of purchases," Robert said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "He's more of a practical man, aren't you, Samuel?" Elena squeezed my hand under the table, a warning to stay calm. But Robert wasn't finished. I mean, let's be honest here. My daughter is a brilliant scientist. She's published in major journals, speaks at international conferences. She could have married anyone, a doctor, a lawyer, someone with real prospects. Instead, she settled for, he gestured vaguely in my direction, well, we all make mistakes. The room went silent. Elena's hand went limp in mine. Harold stared at his cake like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen, and Robert sat there with a satisfied smile, waiting for my reaction. I looked at Elena, really looked at her. She was staring at her lap, her face flushed with embarrassment. Not embarrassment for her father's behavior, but embarrassment for me, for being married to someone her father considered beneath her. That's when I understood, this wasn't going to get better. Elena wasn't going to stand up for me because deep down she agreed with him. Maybe not completely, but enough to stay silent enough to let him tear me down in front of her family. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and looked directly at Robert. You're absolutely right, I said. She does deserve better. I kissed Elena on the forehead, grabbed my coat, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Elena calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I had work to do. The drive home gave me time to think. For months, I'd been preparing investment documents for Nixora Labs. A $15 million funding package that would save Robert's company and secure his retirement. The paperwork was ready. All it needed was my signature. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the car for 10 minutes, and made my decision. I wasn't going to sign those documents. In fact, I was going to do something much more satisfying. I was going to let Robert Kellerman learn exactly what it felt like to need someone he considered worthless.